This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a sincere welcome to this IIEA webinar on the subject of Romania at a crossroads, assessing the results and impact of the 2025 presidential elections. My name is Barry Colfer, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Institute of International and European Affairs in Dublin. I'm delighted that we're turning our lens to Romania, our fellow EU member. Ireland is at the extremity of the EU's west and Romania to the EU's east. Often seen as the smallest big state or the biggest small state, Romania began its democratic transition in 1989 and joined the EU only a few years later in 2007. With a population of around 19 million people, some 45,000 Romanians, according to the CSO, call Ireland home. As those on the call will know, Romania held the presidential election in November, the ninth in the country's post-revolutionary period. No candidate achieved an absolute majority, and a second round was due to be held in December, but that result of the first round was annulled by Romania's constitutional court due to what has been described as a Russian influence operation which impacted the vote. The election was rerun with a first round on the 4th of May and a second on the 18th of May. Around 25,000 Romanians in Ireland are said to have voted in this second round. As we'll learn today, independent candidate Nicușor Dan, the Liberal mayor of Bucharest, the Romanian capital, won the second round, with 54.3% seeing off stiff competition from George Simion, founder and chairman of the right-wing ultranationalist Our Party. Notably, among Romanian citizens living in Ireland, around 53% voted for George Simion. This is a really important election for Romania, and indeed for Europe. And once again, the centre ground, pro-European politics, won an election by defeating a challenger party from the hard right. I'm delighted and honoured to be joined for the discussion today, the first event I'm reliably informed on Romania at the Institute for at least a decade. Professor Cristian Preda is Professor of Political Science at the University of Bucharest. Before this, he served as an MEP from 2009 to 2019. Previous in his glittering career, Cristian was also presidential advisor to President Emil Constantinescu from 1999 to 2000, and President Traian Băsescu from 2007 to 2009. He also served as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs from 2005 to 2007. I also know that Professor Preda is in very high demand from national and international media, where he contributes to discussions on the ongoing government formation in Romania, amongst other things. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We are also joined by Dr. Claudia Bădulescu, who is a research fellow at the Institute for European Studies and the Centre for the Study of Politics at the Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. Dr. Bădulescu specialises in democracy, autocratization, and EU neighbourhood policy, and has served as country analyst for Romania for Freedom House on their Nations in Transit Country Report, one of the world's most highly regarded evaluations of the state of democracy in the region. Claudia holds a PhD from the European University Institute in Florence, where she worked under the supervision of Professor Bridget Laffan, known to many on the call, and Claudia will take up a Government of Ireland Fellowship at the University of Maynooth later this year. Professor Preda, here and after Cristian, will go first, and Dr. Bădulescu, here and after Claudia, will go second. You'll each speak for up to 8 minutes, but I do know you could speak for much more. As ever, the discussion is on the record, and you can participate, you at home, using the Q&A function on Zoom once we conclude the opening remarks. So many thanks as ever, and over to you, please, Cristian.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk today about the Romanian elections and more generally speaking about the Romanian political system. Thank you for inviting me. And I will try to say a few words about 5 different points. We discussed a little bit before the meeting we have today, and the first remark I will do is about the Romanian political system and the role of the president in Romania's political system. And I want to say, first of all, that Romania has a semi-presidential regime. The model of our regime during the constitutional debates at the beginning of the 90s was the constitution of the Fifth French Republic. But I have to say that the power of the Romanian president is not so strong as the power of the French president. And I have two aspects very relevant concerning that. First of all, the Romanian president has not the authority to go to the cabinet's meetings. I mean, so the French president is presiding, is chairing the meetings of the government. The Romanian president has to be invited to a cabinet's meeting. And of course, when he is there, he chairs the meeting. But if not, he's not associated with the decisions of the government directly, but only in an indirect way. The second difference compared to the French Republic is the fact that Romania's president has not he cannot call early elections before 60 days. During this period, he is obliged to try at least twice, to form a government, to form a majority. So he has not the freedom to call early elections as the French president can do it. So it's a little bit a French system, but not so strong concerning the role of the president. And because there is a semi-presidential regime, of course, he can go to a presidentialization, or on the opposite way to a parliamentarization, and it was the case during different periods, and it's one of the sources of our instability. So this is the first general remark I tried to draft. The second remark I'll do, it's about the annulment of the 2024 vote. It was something very new for us. We never experienced such a situation. And there are two important origins of this annulment. Firstly, it was an electoral fraud. And it's unfortunately in the international press, sometimes it was not explained that the main reason was the fact that one candidate did not respect the electoral law, and the aspect he ignored is very important. You know, there is a limit for the financial contributions to the electoral campaign for the presidential position. You cannot spend in total more than 14 million euros. Or in fact, apparently, the cost of the campaign of Mr. Georgescu, who was the first after the 24th November round, the cost of his campaign was much more than 14 million. And also the personal contributions are limited by the law. You cannot you cannot give to a candidate more than 140,000 euros. And we have the proof that one Romanian citizen contributed much more than 1 million euros. So there were frauds like that concerning the financial aspects, and we have a very rigid law. And the strange situation was that Mr. Georgescu declared that he didn't spend one single euro. So you have a very strange situation. It was clear that the cost was much more higher than the provision in the law, and he declared, calling in a certain sense for an investigation, that he didn't spend one single euro. You know, The second aspect was the Russian interference via TikTok. So, I will come back to that, but it was identified during the last days of the campaign, and it was a very brutal interference. And unfortunately, our institutions were not able to prevent that. The institutions saw the fraud, saw the interference, but it was too late to do something. They were not prepared. It was not. They didn't see that coming. So these are the two aspects. The third point I want to mention is concerns the runoff in 2025, because after the annulment, we're obliged to do a new scrutiny, and it was at the beginning of May, 4th of May, and respectively a few days ago on 18th of May. And in fact, we had in this competition three main political options. The first option was expressed, was assumed by an alliance between two EPP parties and one S&D party. They were the party in government, two members of the European People's Party, the National Liberal Party, and the Union of Hungarians, and respectively the Social Democrats, members of S&D. This alliance between the three pro-European parties, this alliance was represented in the scrutiny by two different candidates. One official, Mr. Antonescu, and one unofficial, the former Prime Minister, Social Democrat Prime Minister, Mr. Ponta. Together, they had 35%, together, 20 and respectively 15%. The second big option was the liberal one. I mean, liberal in the sense of Renew Europe. One candidate, Nicușor Dan, who was the winner, and respectively, a second candidate assumed this option, the liberal one, Mrs. Lasconi. She was the second in the November competition. So for the two first political options, the pro-European and the governmental option with two candidates, Antonescu and Ponta, and respectively the liberal option with, again, two different candidates. The third big political option was for the first, I said the two candidates, they obtained 35% together. And for the second option, Nicușor Dan and respectively Mrs. Lasconi, they had together 23.5%. And the third option was the far right and the anti-European option, represented now by Mr. Simion, with 41% for the first round. And it's easy to understand why he was the first, and with the big difference between him and the second, Mr. Nicușor Dan, with only 21%, because the far right option, the far right bloc, was represented by one single candidate. The two other options had two candidates, each of them. So it was easy to imagine that the nationalists will win the first round. The problem was effectively if in the second round Mr. Dan could be able to form a majority, and it was the case. It was not a surprise, at least for me, because we saw in the first competition in November, and after that 1 week later, during the legislative elections, we saw two different trends. First of all, an anti-governmental vote with something like 58-60%, a vote against the parties in government. On the other hand, we saw a very clear tendency for a pro-European attitude. The parties affiliated to the European families, EPP, Renew Europe, and S&D, had together something like 60%. So for me, it was very clear that the winner will be the candidate combining an anti-governmental vote and a pro-European vote. So this was the case, and Nicușor Dan was the winner with a very clear majority, 54 against 46. So it was a very clear victory. On the fourth hand, let me underline the fact that if Nicușor Dan was an independent candidate, but I mean affiliated with this political sensibility, let's call it like that, liberal in the sense of Renew Europe. The other candidate was a very skeptical concerning European things. His party, the Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, is a member of the ECR political family, but in fact, the big difference between our and the other parties in ECR is the fact that our is a pro-Kremlin party. It's not the case of PiS, for example. On the other hand, the profile of Mr. Simion is close to Orban Victor and close to Robert Fico. They are not members of ECR, you know, both of them. So they are different on these very important issues related to Europe. Finally, the current state of democracy in Romania. I think we have two important aspects here. First of all, there is a clear option in favor of Europe, and I will add in favor of NATO, because Romania is one of these Eastern countries very interested to work with NATO allies, and in particular with the Americans. I mean, all Romanian candidates for this presidential election said when they were interrogated about foreign policy, they started by saying the first point in my vision is the partnership with the United States. Nobody said Europe as a first option. Europe, the European Union, including here Nicușor Dan, is the second aspect after the relationship with the States. And the second aspect of our democracy, and I will finish with that, is this opposition to the party cartelization. I mean, this is a trend in many member states, the opposition to the main governmental parties, and in our case there was a liberal reaction to that, and Nicușor Dan was the founding father to say it like that, of this liberal reaction to the tendency to a cartelization of parties. And the second one was the nationalistic and far-right option. And I will finish here, and I'm very interested by your questions, and I will try to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Preda. Before I hand over to Claudia, just to ask one small question, and it's about your views between the first and second round in the 2025 elections. I think I was hastily trying to make sure I get the numbers right. I think that George Simion got 40% in the first round, you said, and something like 46 in the second round. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Did anything about that transition surprise you? The fact that, I mean, Nicușor Dan has a very clear, emphatic victory. It was a 53% versus 46 plus some. Did anything surprise you that the share for George Simion slightly increased?
Not really, because first of all, we had two new aspects now. An increase of participation, first of all, and it was the case in the diaspora, because Romanians can vote everywhere in the world. And a part of this new electorate was also in favor of Simion, but he won in this diaspora vote with a smaller difference than during the first round. And on the other side, he received some new fresh votes from Social Democrats. This is the paradox of Romanian social democracy. They are very nationalistic, and some of them, they are former members of the first far-right party we had in Romania, the party called Greater Romania. He was active from 1991 till 2008. And in a very paradoxical way, some part of this far-right attitude became a part of the Romanian social democracy. I mean, I know that for European socialists, this is a shock. I mean, how a far-right, ultra-nationalist politician could be accepted as a social democrat. I mean, it's a very cynical human resources policy. But for example, the mayor of one of the biggest cities in the southern part of Romania, Craiova, she's a lady, Olguța Vasilescu, and she was mentioned as a potential prime minister of Romania by the Social Democrats. She's a former leader of the Great Romania Party. And, you know, so the socialists, they are very happy with that. I mean, they do not consider that as a problem. Simply because she said, I'm a social democrat, they accepted her, and she's now a social democrat. This is not a very, I mean, it's simply like that. I do not want to comment.
It's really, really interesting, Cristian, and indeed, to many, it would be a paradox. And in Ireland, in a very, 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 very different way, there is also a nexus between kind of social democracy and nationalism, in that, in an emphatically different way, Sinn Féin in Ireland are a left-wing party. They sit with the GUI group in the European Parliament, but they're also nationalists, so they would not align with ultra-nationalists. But in Ireland, that kind of the link between social democracy and nationalism isn't as much of a surprise as it could be in other places. But as I've said, in a very, very different way to what you've described.
Yeah.
Now, Claudia, I think some of what Cristian said is a perfect segue to your remarks talking about the diaspora, Romania's place in the wider world. Please, up to 8 minutes, could you share your thoughts with us?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barry, and thank you, Cristian, for your very interesting presentation. And many thanks to the IIEA for hosting this timely discussion. So Romania's recent presidential election was indeed much more than a domestic contest. It was a geopolitical test, not only for Romania's democracy, but also for Europe's broader capacity to resist authoritarian interference, and especially Russian interference, disinformation, Euroscepticism, and far-right populism. Dan's victory, especially after trailing Simion by nearly 20 points in the first round, amazed many observers and was hailed across European capitals as a democratic sigh of relief. So why did this election matter so much externally, as I'm assigned to discuss about this part, the external part today? Well, first of all, I would say because, as Cristian has just mentioned, what was at stake was Romania's EU and NATO trajectory. Under Simion, Romania was risking drifting into the ranks of Hungary and Slovakia, undermining EU consensus against Russia, blocking aid to Ukraine, and eroding the rule of law from within. The far-right agenda threatened to isolate Romania internationally, weakening its influence in Brussels, stalling reforms, and, more importantly, destabilizing the NATO eastern flank. Second, I would argue that the campaign and the broader electoral process were shaped by a clear and dangerous pattern of foreign interference. The original 2024 presidential elections were annulled, as Cristian mentioned, by Romania's constitutional court after evidence emerged of large-scale disinformation and financial meddling linked to Russian actors. And this was unprecedented, as it was the first time that a major EU state annul the vote due to foreign interference. And what followed actually was extraordinary. In just a few months, Romanian civil society, journalists, NGOs, including Cristian on social media, and democratic institutions basically rallied to defend electoral integrity, democracy, and EU integration. And the rerun of the election was held really under not only under intense scrutiny, but also under intense pressure in the civil society. And despite real concerns, it saw a historic turnout with 64% participation, which was the highest in the past 25 years, and an extraordinary civic mobilization to stop the extremist candidate. And this was noticed far beyond Bucharest, as European leaders and institutions were quick to congratulate Dan for his victory. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Council President Antonio Costa, President Macron, and others praised Romania and Romanians for choosing Europe, democracy, and the rule of law. The European press also widely reported the vote as a turning point, and not only for Romania, but also for the EU's ability more widely to push back against nationalist liberalism. The outcome also reassured Ukraine, as President Zelensky congratulated Dan, calling Romania a key partner. And also, this is very important, as under Simion, Romanian support for Ukraine would have been uncertain, if not reversed. On the other side, under Dan, we can expect continued assistance, humanitarian, logistical, diplomatic, but also military, when Ukraine needs it most. In Washington, also, the Trump administration remained largely silent until yesterday. If I understood correctly, Donald Trump had a phone call with Nicușor Dan to congratulate him, which is really very, very good news. At the same time, it's worth noting that, weirdly enough, if I can say so, certain American figures, like key public figures such as J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, and even Andrew Tate, the controversial figure, took a pro-Simion position throughout the campaign and criticized Romania for having a rather flawed democracy. But NATO officials and EU partners and transatlantic observers understood what was at stake. Dan's victory ensured actually that Romania remains a trusted, stable ally in the region, especially on the front line of the war with Russia. It's worth noting also Russia's reaction to the elections. It was predictably hostile, and the Kremlin dismissed the vote as curious or strange, accusing the West of manipulating it, in particular France, and recycled disinformation to undermine Dan's legitimacy. Here, the narrative of a liberal dictatorship imposed from Brussels was pushed across Telegram and Russian state media. But the real message was clear. Moscow lost its preferred candidates, an influence channel, and it's not very happy with this. I have a few more minutes. So it's notable in this regard that this information did not stop at the ballot box. We keep on seeing AI-generated videos, fake screenshots, false narratives about French intervention, about military mobilization or NATO interference, all flooding social media after the vote, but also as we speak, and the goal was not only to overturn the result, but also to sow doubt, to polarize the society, and to maintain destabilizing presence. So what does this all mean for the region and for Romania's foreign policy as we go forward? Well, first, it secures Romania's place as a core member of the European project, as Dan campaigned on an agenda of EU cohesion funds, EU integration, anti-corruption reform, and institutional modernization. And I do believe that this work is going to accelerate now with him as a president. And it also means that Romania stays firmly committed to NATO's Eastern strategy, hosting more troops, boosting defense spending, and also working with allies on the Black Sea security. Second, and very important, it has direct implications for Moldova. The Moldovan government under Maia Sandu have been watching this election very closely, as a Simion victory would have emboldened pro-Russian actors and weakened Moldova's EU path. On the other hand, Dan's victory reassures Chișinău that Bucharest will remain a firm partner both bilaterally and within EU enlargement negotiations. Third, and I will approach my conclusions, it's a signal to the region across Central and Eastern Europe, and including in Poland, where a similar political clash is underway. Romania's result shows that civic mobilization and democratic resilience can win even against nationalist disinformation-heavy campaigns. But the deeper lesson, in my view, is this. We may have won this battle, but the war continues. Russia's hybrid influence doesn't depend on winning power outright, but it thrives on confusion, fatigue, division, but also on economic frustrations, institutional fragilities, and gaps in media literacy, and also more generally in the education system. And I believe that Romanian civil society stepped up this time, but that the level of vigilance needs to remain constant. So to conclude, it was a victory for democracy in Romania and for the European project, but it must be seen as a beginning, not an end. The external threats persist, but it is now up to us to, policymakers, civil society, and institutions to build on this fragile but powerful moment of democratic clarity and restoration. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.